The spiritualistic truths. If you're an incarnation, he said, in a sudden glow of admiration, you're the incarnation of an angel. How you can forgive her odious manners to you—" "My dear, shut up," said Olga. "We've got to do something. Now, how would it be if you gave a nice party on Christmas night, and asked her at once? Ask her to help you in getting it up. Make it clear she's going to run it." "All right. You'll come, won't you?" "Certainly I will not." "Perhaps I will come in after dinner with Goosie or someone of that sort. Don't you see it would spoil it all if I were at dinner? You must rather pointedly leave me out. Give her a nice expensive refined Christmas present too. You might give her that picture you're doing of me. No, I suppose she wouldn't like that. But just comfort her and make her feel you can't get on without her. You've been her right hand all these years. Make her give her tableau again. And then I think you must ask me in afterwards. I long to see her and Peppino as Brunhilde and Siegfried. Just attend to her, Georgie, and buck her up. Promise me you will. And do it as if your heart was in it, otherwise it's no good." Georgie began packing up his paint box. This was not the plan he had hoped for on Christmas Day, but if Olga wished this, it had got to be done. "Well, I'll do my best," he said. "Thanks ever so much. You're a darling. And how is your planchette getting on? I've been lazy about my crystal, but I get so tired of my own nose." "Planchette would write nothing but a few names," said Georgie, omitting the fact that Olga's was the most frequent. "I think I shall drop it." This was but reasonable, for since Riseholme had some new and absorbing excitement every few weeks, to say nothing of the current excitement of daily life, it followed that even the most thrilling pursuits could not hold the stage for very long. Still, the interest in spiritualism had died down with the rapidity of the seed on stony ground. "Even Mrs Quantock seems to have cooled," said Olga. "She and her husband were here last night, and they looked rather bored when I suggested table turning. I wonder if anything has happened to put her off it." "What do you think could have?" asked Georgie with Riseholme alacrity. "Georgie, do you really believe in the Princess and Pocky?" she asked. Georgie looked round to see that there was no one within hearing. "I did at the time," he said. "At least I think I did, but it seems less likely now. Who was the Princess anyway? Why didn't we ever hear of her before? I believe Mrs Quantock met her in the train or something." "So do I," said Olga, "but not a word. It makes Aunt Jane and Uncle Jacob completely happy to believe in it all. Their lines of life are enormous, and they won't die till they're over 100. Now go and see Mrs Lucas, and if she doesn't ask you to lunch, you can come back here." Georgie put down his picture and painting apparatus at his house, and went on to Lucia's, definitely conscious that though he did not want to have her to dinner on Christmas Day, or go back to his duets and his ADC duties, there was a spice and savour in so doing that came entirely from the fact that Olga wished him to, that by this service he was pleasing her. In itself it was distasteful, in itself it tended to cut him off from her if he had to devote his time to Lucia, but he still delighted in doing it. "I believe I'm falling in love with her this time," said Georgie to himself. "She's wonderful, she's big, she's—" At that moment his thoughts were violently diverted, for Robert Quantock came out of his house in a tremendous hurry, merely scowling at Georgie, and positively trotted across the green in the direction of the newsagent's. Instantly Georgie recollected that he had seen him there already this morning before his visit to Olga, buying a new twopenny paper in a yellow cover called Todd's News. They had had a few words of genial conversation, and what could have happened in the last 2 hours that made Robert merely gnash his teeth at Georgie now, and make a second visit to the paper shop? It was impossible not to linger a moment and see what Robert did when he got to the paper shop, and with the aid of his spectacles Georgie perceived that he presently loaded himself with a whole packet of newspapers in yellow covers, presumably Todd's News. Flesh and blood could not resist the cravings of curiosity, and making a detour so as to avoid being gnashed at again by Robert, who was coming rapidly back in his direction, he strolled round to the paper shop and asked for a copy of Todd's News. Instantly the bright December morning grew dark with mystery, for the proprietor told him that Mr Quantock had bought every copy he possessed of it. No further information could be obtained, except that he had bought a copy of every other daily paper as well. Georgie could make nothing of it whatever, and having observed Robert hurry into his house again, went on his errand to Lucia. Had he seen what Robert did when he got home, it is doubtful if he could have avoided breaking into the house and snatching a copy of Todd's News from him. Robert went to his study and locked the door. He drew out from under his blotting pad the first copy of Todd's News that he bought earlier in the morning, and put it with the rest. Then, with a furrowed brow, he turned to the police reports in the Times, and after looking at them, laid the paper down. He did the same to the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, the Morning Post, the Daily Chronicle. Finally, this was the last of the daily papers, he perused the Daily Mirror, tore it in shreds, and said, "Damn!" He sat for a while in thought, trying to recollect if anybody in Riseholme except Colonel Boucher took in the Daily Mirror. But he felt morally certain that no one did, and letting himself out of his study and again locking the door after him, he went into the street and saw at a glance that the Colonel was employed in whirling Mrs Weston round the green. Instead of joining them, he hurried to the Colonel's house and, for there was no time for half measures, fixed Atkinson with his eye and said he would like to write a note to Colonel Boucher. He was shown into his sitting room and saw the Daily Mirror lying open on the table. As soon as he was left alone, he stuffed it into his pocket, told Atkinson he would speak to the Colonel instead, and intercepted the path of the bath chair. He was nearly run over, but stood his ground, and in a perfectly firm voice asked the Colonel if there was any news in the morning papers. With the Colonel's decided negative ringing joyfully in his ears, he went home again, and locked himself for the second time into his study. There is a luxury, when some fell danger has been averted by promptness and presence of mind, in living through the moments of that danger again, and Robert opened Todd's News, for that gave the fuller account, and read over the paragraph in the police news headed "Bogus Russian Princess." But now he gloated over the lines which had made him shudder before, when he read how Marie Lowenstein, of 15 Gerald Street, Charing Cross Road, calling herself Princess Popovsky, had been brought up at the Bow Street Police Court for fraudulently professing to tell fortunes and produce materialized spirits at a séance in her flat. Sordid details followed. A detective who had been there seized an apparition by the throat and turned on the electric light. It was the woman Popovsky's throat that he held, and her secretary, Hezekiah Schwartz, was discovered under the table detaching an electric hammer. A fine was inflicted. A moment's mental debate was sufficient to determine Robert not to tell his wife. It was true that she had produced Popovsky, but then he had praised and applauded her for that. He, no less than she, had been convinced of Popovsky's integrity, high rank, and marvellous psychic powers. And together they had soared to a pinnacle of unexampled greatness in the Riseholme world. Besides, poor Daisy would be simply flattened out if she knew that Popovsky was no better than the Guru. He glanced at the pile of papers and at the fireplace. It had been a cold morning, clear and frosty, and a good blaze prospered in the grate. Out of each copy of Todd's News he tore the page on which were printed the police reports, and fed the fire with them. Page after page he put upon it. Never had so much paper been devoted to one grate. Up the chimney they flew in sheets of flame. Sometimes he was afraid he had set it on fire, and he had to pause, shielding his scorched face, until the hollow rumbling had died down. With the page from 2 copies of the Daily Mirror, the holocaust was over, and he unlocked the door again. No one in Riseholme knew but he, and no one should ever know. Riseholme had been electrified by spiritualism, and even now the séances had been cheap at the price. The debris of all these papers he caused to be removed by the housemaid, and this was hardly done when his wife came in from the green. "I thought there was a chimney on fire, Robert," she said. "You would have liked it to be the kitchen chimney, as you said the other day." "Stuff and nonsense, my dear," said he. "Lunch time, isn't it?" "Yes. Ah, there's the post. None for me, and two for you.